Sa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good evening, everyone online, and good evening, everyone here. So the first round of interviews are past. Just a reminder to stay with the noble silence. We're a really good group. We're quite serious in our practice, and the opportunity to be with yourself and to be quiet is quite rare. So let's keep going with that. At this point of a retreat, I realized that I shouldn't say much more because the ideas that are presented need to be processed, and it takes a while. And some of the words are pretty easy, but I think the ideas are subtle. They're not obvious. And I think the way I teach is not so obvious. It's a bit, I don't know what it is, but it works for me. And that's all I can talk about. So so at this time of a retreat, I was asking Vibhuvan how many we have. 5 more talks. So then I start to think I have to give bedtime stories now. Just put everyone to sleep. But you've heard all my bedtime stories. This is the problem. What I really, I have a, I have a 9-day retreat 2 days after this one in Wisdom Park in Malaysia. And I think that's like 50 people. And then at Christmas, I have a 4-day retreat at Bub's for 90 people. And I must admit, I enjoy a small retreat. Because like 90 people, it becomes more like a lecture. And I like the feedback. Like I really like to hear how you're practicing because it helps me as a teacher. But also I just haven't experienced it. I can't possibly experience all the range of human possibilities, inner possibilities. So I just see, oh, wow, you do that and you get that result. Oh, I get it. Yeah. So that helps me as a teacher. So not only do I get feedback about what I'm trying to talk about, in that vein, I can see, that's not effective. Or, oh, okay, that's confusing. Oh, that one worked. And that's very, very helpful. Um, and then learning like new angles and new perspectives and different karma that people are facing. So then as a monk, I talk with a lot of people and try to engage them in their struggles with life and their struggles with meditation. And that's a huge privilege. You know, you think about people speaking their most intimate problems, sharing like really difficult things in the privacy of that teacher-student relationship or Kalyanamitta relationship. That's actually very touching. And the kind of capacity the situation to touch people in a very authentic way, not just superficial, kind of jovial, ha 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 kind of way, which is okay, but to actually talk about deep and serious things. It's a great privilege, but a great responsibility too. So I think over the years I've learned to listen much better. And when I first started, and probably when I first started to try to counsel or teach, I'd always jump in with an answer. I know I got the answer. And I realized, no, you're just trying to fix everything. And I realized that I had a desire to fix things. I didn't want people to suffer. Oh, if you do this, this will fix it. And that wasn't compassion. It was compassion. I mean, it wasn't cruelty, but it's more like me worrying about this person and wanting to fix their problem. And they didn't really want that. They just wanted someone to hear, someone to listen, someone to know, someone to care. Simple things like that. And then sometimes I could have a good thought, but oftentimes I didn't. And I learned a lot of this from Luang Sumedo, because in England, I was often his attendant and listening to a lot of interviews with people. And I saw what a good listener he was and is. And there was a woman who came down. We were in London. She phoned from Scotland. I don't know how she found out of us because no one really knew who we were. No one knew Ajahn Chah or Ajahn Sumedho. Few people. Anyway, she found out about us and came down, and she had the most horrific life story. It's like impossible. How do you live through this? And there was no solution, no magic bullet. And Lompo just listened for 3 hours because I think no one would talk to her because it was so tragic. And what can you do? And he just listened and listened. And then after 3 hours, she said, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And I thought, that's the answer. That was so good. She said, "Oh, thank you." And she left full of gratitude. He didn't solve her problem, but he gave her love, he gave her heart. So I learned a lot from Long Paul. He's a very beautiful man in his giving and his honesty. Very beautiful. Um, and so on this retreat, I kind of halfway through the retreat, I kind of think to myself, well, what have you been talking about? And, what's going on and what's the theme and what's the momentum of it. And obviously I talked about the Nibbana Sutta because I realized that a lot of people hear that from Lone Paul, but they don't know its reference. So I wanted to get that across. I don't know how well that works, but at least you have some idea where that's coming from. But then there's that little mantra keeps sneaking in. I love you. I've always loved you. I will always love you. And I realize what I'm trying to convey is that the attitude of awareness is kindness. I usually think maybe of awareness as just a neutral thing. But again, to allow all things to arise and cease and to allow nature to flow in its natural way means that the dualities of beautiful and ugly and uh, love and hate, these are natural. It's all natural. And that awareness must have some sense of kind regard. You regard things with kindness. So I don't see awareness as being just kind of neutral territory or just a kind of scientific observation. To me, it does seem that it isn't something about it which is allowing and so on. And I think, well, I had this story I've told a lot. I'm trying to get a bedtime story going. A bedtime story, but you've probably heard me talk about my meeting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and I was in. This would have been probably a year before Luang Por Chah died, around maybe 1989. I was in New Zealand, and I was a minor member of the committee that invited His Holiness and his entourage to come to New Zealand on the first visit that he he visited New Zealand. And so I got to be in the inner circle around him, not that close, but close enough. And the first city he came to was Wellington, where our monastery was. And his habit was to go to the indigenous people first. And this would be the Maori. The Maori are the indigenous folk of New Zealand, because he was a displaced person, and he felt for that troubling history. And so when he went to and the lodge house, or the lodge, or the what, I suppose, of the Maori is called the marae. So the main marae in Wellington is by the harbor, but on a slight hill. And we were waiting for His Holiness to arrive. And I was the one that greeted him when he got out of the car. And in the Tibetan tradition, you have this white shawl. So I presented him with the shawl, and he just beamed in on me. His eyeballs just in the most loving way. It was like, it just knocked me over. And then he put the scarf over my head, and then he went to another person. And the Maori culture it's a warrior culture. And if anyone from a non-tribal person wants to come onto the marae, they have to be officially welcomed onto the marae. And the way they would do that is, especially if there's a significant group of people from like a tribe leader, like His Holiness, they would have a ceremony of bringing on the group that's coming as visitors. So I was a part of that group, and His Holiness was the head of that. And the way it works is there's an elder, a woman with a very good voice. She's the one that greets us. And then she walked us into the gates at the foot of the hill. And then the marae building was up top. And then there's another woman, significantly women. She was maybe 60 years old or something like that. She was an elder in that sense. And the other woman is now on top of the hill, and they're calling back and forth in Maori, one of the Maori languages, and basically probably saying, "Can we come up?" All right. And they're singing and yelling or calling to each other. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this guy who is really buffed, really strong, Arnold Schwarzenegger guy with just a grass skirt on, comes and confronts us on the road going up to the marae not as an act, as a part of the ritual. And he's covered in tattoos, and he's got a spear, and he sticks his tongue out. The Maori, they do that. They're totally frightening. And he's walking backwards, and the two women are calling each other. And I think the ritual is like, don't mess around. Don't mess with us, man. You're in our territory. But His Holiness all the time is doing this all the time. It was wonderful. It was like these two cultures kind of dancing with each other. I mean, they're civilized people. The Maoris aren't savages, but they go back to these warrior traditions when they have formal things like this. So, we're kind of dancing up the hill, and His Holiness is going up the hill. And then we went into the marae, and then the ritual was that our party, including the Tibetan monks, Theravada monks, and lay people, His Holiness, sat in one end of this. It was probably 2/3 of this building. So we sat at one end, and the Maori people sat at the other end. We were in chairs, and the ritual was that the Maori would have a speaker, and they would sing a song. And then our side, His Holiness first, would have a speaker and sing a song or do a chant. And then we did that 3 times. So the second time the, we had the Theravada chanting, we chanted Karanya Metta or something. And the speaker for the Maori side was a professor of anthropology at Victoria University, I think. Very, very erudite, very educated man, and he spoke of the tragedy of his people. And then His Holiness spoke of the tragedy of his people. But there was this, in His Holiness, there was this glowing joy, this kind of, he's the most wonderful man. This kind of bubbling joy of someone who's worked through tragedy and has come out of it a very, very wise and beautiful being. And he's one of my heroes, just, someone who has endured so much hardship for himself and his people, and what the monks have gone through in the communities, and that he comes out of it glowing with compassion. It's so inspiring, so inspiring. But anyway, where this bedtime story is leading a bit of Dhamma, but I got the bedtime story in. But the bit of Dhamma wasn't just a bit of Dhamma. Then in a talk, this would have been up in Auckland now. So I followed him around. I went to all the occasions, and he gave a talk in Auckland at one of the big auditoriums. And in that talk, he said that compassion was the method. And that really struck me. It's not it's not a practice that you do to create something. It's the method that you live by. And that's where I think from Lopa Sumedho, but also from His Holiness, I said, yeah, that awareness has to be compassion. You see what I mean? That the way I view samsara is from kindness. And I found that so, how sometimes a teaching, you just hear one sentence and it kind of reverberates through your heart for the rest of your life. And that was one of those sentences. So ever since then, I've always, I haven't always been kind and compassionate, by the way, because I've faced lots of anger and resentment and greed, hatred, and delusion in different ways. But that teaching that the way to be aware of it is with kind regard, with compassion. I guess that's why I come up with a weird mantra like, I love you, I've always loved you, I will always love you. Because when I started, I always thought awareness was control and not overeating and counting the number of spoonfuls of food and I thought, is this a way to live your life? As a 34-year-old man, do I just want to just count the number of spoons of food I've had? This doesn't sound like a life at all. And then I looked at Ajahn Chah, and Ajahn Chah was so happy, really happy man. Celibate, no money, and has a funny outfit on. And I thought, he's really happy, enjoys. So there was one time where I was a Samanera, and at Wapapong at that time, we would get nimons to eat at some merchant's home in Ubon or in Warin. And the food was very, 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 very simple. It was simple. there wasn't there wasn't much. I think you get the idea. So, and I've told this story before, but it's a bedtime story. So then, because I was a Samanera, I always dreamed of going to one of these dhanas. Well, finally, I'm going to get a meal. And but I thought, I'm just a man and I'll never go. And then one day I see my name on the board. I was number 7 of 7, and my mind went bananas. Oh, I couldn't sleep all night. So then I went to the Dhamma. I was so greedy. I just, and it was horrible. It was a horrible meal because I was so greedy and I couldn't get at the rice and put so many sweets on top or whatever it was. And we had workers in the monastery. So Lompa Cha said, put lots of food in your bowl because then leftovers will be in your bowl. We can give it to the workers. Oh, I can put lots of food. I have an excuse now. Put the cakes in. And it was terrible. I suffered so much over that meal. So then we're in the car. We're driving back to the monastery, sitting there depressed. And Lompa looks at me and says, what's up? What's your problem? I said, oh, Lompa, I'm so bad. I still enjoy food. And he says, well, so do I. And it was so compassionate. And he does. He doesn't have a problem with it. It was so compassionate. I thought, you're a great being. So the lessons of my life I've been really lucky to have these like when I read the biography of Luang Man, I couldn't relate to that. It was too weird. All this magical stuff and then all the warrior stuff, Dosu, calculate, and I said, I can't do that. And then the magical stuff, what's that got to do with me being greedy? So I couldn't relate to that whole way of practice. And fortunately, Luang Cha did never spoke that way. Sometimes it was a kind of idiom, Toraman, Toraman Kile, which I misunderstood. But it was mostly like Oton and develop barami and be grateful, and the lay people are feeding you. Katanya Katavedi. There's just very, very solid, good qualities. And then on my first year as a Samanera, I was a very fierce kind of practitioner, and I I was trying to do nisachik, not laying down. So I probably didn't sleep for a couple of weeks because I couldn't fall asleep or whatever. So I had a seizure in the sala. I had have you ever seen a grand mal seizure? Epileptic, where a person shakes and they bite their tongue off, and it's pretty horrific. I don't have epilepsy, but I had this seizure. Um, so I was a Tumsang pet, and Luang Cha came with 10 monks or so. And so then we were maybe a total of 20 and maybe 100 lay people. And usually it was just a few monks and a few lay people. And we had received our alms food. We were chanting the Anumotana. And I think we were starting to eat. We were about to start to eat. I don't have no memory of this, but my mind went into a seizure. My body went into a seizure. My head went back into a louvered window, and it cut my head open. And then I fell. This is a bad bedtime story. I fell over onto the ground, and then I'm biting my tongue off. And then Ajahn Pabagro jumps down and puts my bowl, the, the bowl strap into my mouth so I don't bite my tongue off. So I kind of come out of it, and then they take me to I'm not sure, little township, and there's no hospital, but there is a veterinarian clinic. I'm like a dog. So they, it's this true story. And they take me into Can I Ajahn Pabaga's there? My head's all bloody. I said, "Ooh." But at least I'm conscious now. And then they have no anesthesia, of course. So two guys hold me down, and they only had like a curved needle, oh, like a shoe. Ajahn Pabagro can't take it. He goes out, he's sick. And so I come out of this with a few stitches in my head. I'm just like really stunned. And the owner of the local Esso station, Sangchai, imagine, I remember that. That was 50 years ago. Sangchai, that was his name. And Lompa Cha sitting there drinking a Pepsi. And he says to me, "Will you take it easy?" That's all he said. So the Farangs must have been great entertainment for him. So my character was incredibly intense, plus the fear. So there's a lot of kilesa to work with, lots of food. And even though I had that seizure, I kept making these adhitanas, some stupid adhitana about not this or not that. And you've heard this story too, but finally, one Vasa, I go up to Lumpur Sumeru, Lumpur, I'm making an adhitana. He says, "Oh, no, no." Lumpur, I adhitana never to make another adhitana. And he says, true story. So even though there was lots of effort, there wasn't much wisdom. But I was sincere. I kept trying. You're looking at a very nice product now. But the karma you have is the karma you have, right? And you don't organize your vibhaka karma, you have it, and that's what you have to work with. And in the end, what got me through was not the texts. It wasn't the intellectual part. It was the Kalyanamitta, a teacher who sees that, well, this guy's crazy, but maybe he'll make it, and says to you, 5 years, you'll feel a bit better. And no, nothing magical, but just like sincere love, that the teacher loves you and is happy to make fun of you and poke you and challenge you, but in the background there's always this deep love. And Lompa Cha radiated that. He really radiated that, even though I was like, I loved him, but also feared him because I was afraid he could read my mind, and he wouldn't want to look at my mind. And so that the final time I saw Lompa Cha, where he was compos mentis, where he could speak, before he had his strokes, was in 1979, I think. That would make sense. In 1979, when we had just started Chithurst Monastery, and he had come and he was leaving. And in the last morning, his flight was early, so he couldn't have the normal meal. And we prepared him a special meal, and I was there with five other senior monks or monks, and we were all so sad to see him go. It was like your mother and your father are kind of leaving you, sort of feeling. And I mean, we're grown men, but we're still children. That kind of deep love of your teacher. And he was just so sensitive to our heartfelt love of him, and so in tune with us, that he had a bowl of rice, and he took little bowls and gave us all a bit of his rice. And then he changed into summer robes. He had winter robes, and gave Ajahn Kitisaro got his sabong, and someone else got his angsa. And it was so touching. It was so touching. And then he left. And the next time I saw him was, I think, 2 years later, and he was now paralyzed. And that was a different teaching, a different time. And that was so tragic to see him like that. And I was, it's really obviously very affected. And I came out of his kuti, and then I walked over and I went over to Luang, and Luang saw me quite dejected. He said, "So what's up? What's the problem?" I said, "Oh, it's so sad to see Luang like that." He said, "That's not Luang, that's just a body." Oh, that was such a wise thing to say. Because you do identify with like Luang Cha's radiance and his charisma and his power. He's a powerful man. And then all of a sudden there's this body. You can't communicate. So, obviously I kind of relate to the physical, but then what was going on inside? It's kind of radiant. And that you heard that from the Upataks who took care of Luang Cha, that his presence, even though his body was in bad form, the presence was radiant and powerful and loving. So that's my bedtime story. I'll leave it there for tonight.